Thank you. So I am reading from a work in progress that is tentatively, well, I'm not tentative about it, but we'll see what an editor says, that I'm calling A Grip of Time. And a grip of time is a prison expression for a...
So what? I didn't hear that. Prison expression.
Prison expression, for a very long period of time. So when you're serving a grip of time, you're serving decades of time. You're in for decades of time. I think I will just start to read this, and then when I need to explain anything, I will explain it. And these are not my pajamas. Move to the side, he said, jerking his head to the right. I obeyed. Obeying is what you do when a prison guard tells you to do something. I had set off the metal detector. The guard, big, fleshy, bored, hardly looked at me. I wasn't a threat. I was barely an annoyance, someone holding up the line. Step out of the way, he said again. I was moving too slowly, trying to wedge myself between the wall and the guard without touching the guard. I looked at him, thought about saying something, didn't. I was shoeless, beltless, and jewelry-free. My pockets were empty. I didn't know why I'd set off the alarm. And so I stood to the side, silent, awaiting further instructions, looking over my shoulder at a scene that was becoming familiar to me. The Greyhound bus-style visitors' waiting room with its linoleum floors and its plastic chairs. The dozens of weary young women crowding in, jostling for position, carrying their fitfully sleeping babies, holding tight to their squirming toddlers. Like me, they were waiting to be processed. Like me, they were waiting to begin the trek, simultaneously tedious and frightening, through the metal detector, down a long blank corridor, through heavy metal gates that clanged behind you, past a checkpoint, through another set of clanging gates, down an even longer corridor, past a second checkpoint, through a third gate, and onto the heavily guarded control floor that sat at the heart of the Oregon State Penitentiary. Somewhere along the line, the women and children peeled off to the big, featureless visitors' room. I would walk, accompanied by an officer, 20 feet across the control floor to another gate and up a flight of stairs to the activities floor. The women were there to see their inmate husbands. I was there to meet with my inmate writers. Anybody been in the Oregon State Penitentiary? Oregon State Penitentiary is home to 2,000 men. It's the oldest penitentiary in our state, and the only maximum security facility, and the site of our death row. Even though we haven't put anybody to death in quite a while, we still have 20 some odd people on death row because the citizens of our state reinstated the death penalty, so it's still on the books. The prison sits invisible behind a 25-foot-high concrete perimeter wall, less than a mile and a half from the pretty golden-domed state capitol building in the heart of Salem. Inside the walls is a 22-acre self-contained city with the state's largest commercial laundry, a furniture factory, a metal fabrication shop, a call center, vocational shops, an infirmary, a hospice in the infirmary, 2 recreation yards, and 4 cell blocks, 3 of them massive Sing-Sing-like cages within cages that look like the setting of every grim prison movie you've ever seen. Parallel rows of barred cells, 40 cells long, 5 tiers high, narrow metal walkways, nothing but concrete and steel. The drive into the prison grounds is as lovely as the prison is not. This is fertile Willamette Valley River bottomland. The penitentiary entrance is landscaped and manicured. There are brilliant green lawns and towering conifers, graceful weeping willows and stately oaks. There are rose bushes and hydrangeas. There are birds, and then there aren't. up the set of concrete steps and into the main building, a late 19th century edifice that looks like a cross between an asylum and a high school. There is the tired waiting room with vending machines and an old ATM, and a long counter for processing visitors, and a TSA-style conveyor belt and metal detector overseen by guards, like the one who's just pulled me aside. I stood, still waiting. I was not new to this. This was my 5th time at OSP, my 5th time through the visitor control checkpoint, and I knew the drill. Show picture ID at the counter, sign in, check pockets, stash purse in one of the 25-cent lockers that occasionally worked, queue up and wait my turn to go through. I knew how to dress. Show as little skin as possible. Wear clothing that was loose enough to not be form-fitting, but not so loose as to look like you might be trying to hide something. Don't look too feminine, but don't look too butch either. No jeans. The inmates wore jeans. Nothing blue, because they all dress in blue. The inmates all dressed in blue. I had learned the rules, and I followed the rules. The guard ordered me to check my pockets. Nothing. Remove any jewelry, already done, and go through again. Again, the alarm sounded. His next step was to call over a female guard to pat me down, or he could take me aside and wand me, like the TSA guys do. A hassle, but either way, I'd be good to go. I was getting antsy. I had my writing group waiting for me upstairs on the activities floor. 8 guys, all members of the Lifers Club. They were decades into their grip of time, serving either life with, the with being the possibility of parole, or life without, meaning they would die in prison. I'd started working with them a few months back, coming in to run a writing workshop. It was happening in fits and starts. 1 month I had permission to come in, the next nothing. The idea, which I had pitched to a prison education committee, was to offer lifers a chance to write about their lives while offering me a window into their world. As I told the committee, the workshop would be both educational, inmates would practice and refine their writing skills under my tutelage, and therapeutic. It would also, I thought, educate me about prison life. The guys would be my window. I knew from experience that crafting stories about one's own life was a powerful way to process and learn from experience. My hope was that writing would help these men identify and understand the arc of their lives spent almost entirely behind bars. Owing largely to decades of tough on crime policies, mandatory minimum sentences, 3 strikes laws, the elimination of federal parole, and the end of time off for good behavior, the prisons were now full of people who knew no other lives as adults other than life in prison, lifers. And yet the details and so I'm sure you know, because incarceration is perennially in the news, that we have 25% of all of the people incarcerated on the planet are incarcerated in this country. And there was just an NPR story this morning about coming from a study done in Europe, actually in Vienna, of the 800% increase in incarceration of women in the United States for drug offenses. 800% over the last 10 years. And yet the details, the dailiness of those lives spent behind bars, were almost completely unknown. My hope was that as I helped these guys create a narrative for themselves that was not about the very worst thing they ever did, but rather about the decades-long lives that they had been living since they fell, I would get as close to an in-the-trenches look at the realities of incarceration as I could. Their writing and the insight it would provide into their internal and external lives, the evolution and dynamics of our little group would, I hope, open up a lens into their world. So I stood there, waiting, eager to get upstairs and start the afternoon workshop. But today the guard wasn't going to let that happen. Maybe he didn't like the way I looked. Maybe he was having a bad day. I don't know. What I know is he made a spur-of-the-moment choice not to call over the female guard to pat me down and not to wand me. He wasn't going to make it possible for me to get through the control point. I was frustrated, and I was furious, and I was powerless. And I couldn't let it show. This same guard might be manning the metal detector on my next visit. I didn't want to make an enemy. And all of a sudden, I got it. I got a whiff of what it was like to live inside these walls. Walking back to the locker to retrieve my stuff, I felt almost queasy with impotence. And I felt a little crazy, that kind of crazy you feel when things that made sense all of a sudden don't. I was in a place that was all about rules, that was dictated and constrained by rules. If you knew the rules, if you played by the rules, everything was predictable and you were okay, right? Wrong, because prison was also a place of random acts. Knowing and obeying the rules didn't spare you from the random acts. The rules created the expectation of predictability. On the other hand, anything could happen. You were buffeted coming and going, and you never knew when it was going to happen, and you couldn't do a thing about it. It would be more than a month before I'd meet with the guys again. So this group of guys is eight people. Started out as 3 people, and I'll tell you just a tiny bit about them, and then I'll read one other thing. They are all lifers. 3 of them were convicted, and you don't get life in prison for writing bad checks. You get life in prison for doing something bad, and you get life in prison for murder, and not just murder, but aggravated murder. Really like heinous crime murders. So 3 of the men committed their crimes as juveniles, 1 at 16 and 2 at 17. And they are the youngest people in the group. They are 37, 38, and 39. And then my oldest guy is 69. No, I'm sorry, he's 79. 79. When I first started the group, I asked them not to write their last names on anything they gave me, and I asked the man who was helping me in activities at the prison to not tell me the people's last name, because I knew that if I knew their last name, I'd look them up. And I didn't want them to write about their crimes, and I didn't want to know what their crimes were. I wanted to be able to encounter them as who they were at the moment. And as it developed, somebody wrote their last name on something, and of course I withheld myself for about 14 seconds, and then I looked them up in the system. And then, at any rate, over the course of now a year and a half, I actually know what everybody did. And I'm glad that I didn't know beforehand. Yeah. Oh, I was going to say that the reason that I thought about this is not to save myself from the shock of being in a room with murderers, because I knew I was in the room with murderers, but because when I did a book called Dancing with Rose, which was about Alzheimer's, caring for people with Alzheimer's, I found that I was able to see who people were, the people in my care who had Alzheimer's. I was able to really see who they were and see their personalities, because I didn't know who they were beforehand. And with my own mother, who by that time had already died and had Alzheimer's, I never saw past I could never see who she was. I only saw who she wasn't. So I thought this was a good lesson to bring to the prison experience. So that's why I didn't ask him. So that I wrote a while ago, and it could possibly be the opening scene, I'm not sure. And this I wrote about being with them in November. That's just a couple months back. You'd think I would be accustomed to it now, this change from outside to in, from free to caged. I should be used to the routine. I think I'm used to the routine. And then today I'm so flustered by the rules and the guards and the sign-ins and the glare from the fluorescent lights and the sounds of the little kids who only see their fathers through half-inch thick polycarbonate that I turn the locker key in the wrong direction and lose my quarter. It's the only money I've brought in with me. So I borrow a quarter from Stephen. I'll just say Stephen is my angel. He is a man who helps out with activities. He calls himself a hug-a-thug because he believes in, guess what, rehabilitation. He believes in education, and he's not the only one in the prison system, but that's not the way our Department of Corrections works or thinks. So he has really helped me a lot. So I borrow a quarter from Stephen, and I'm so flustered that I place my driver's license into the locker and turn the key and lock it in. Until I get my official ID badge, possibly the day before hell freezes over, I need my license to hand over to a guard to get my temporary visitor's badge. By the way, I did get my ID. I did like a happy little dance, and it was 5.5 months after I went through the whole training process. I was told it would be 6 weeks to get the ID, and at any rate, I got it. It's a terrible picture of me, so that's the downside. So I open, I need my license to hand over to the guard. So I open the locker, grab my license, borrow another quarter from Stephen, and slowly, as if I'm doing something complicated for the first time, insert the coin and turn the key 90 degrees to the left, and finally I do it right. This little routine that I've been doing for 1.5 years. It's a rocky start to this afternoon's session. I'm already off kilter because it's been more than 1.5 months since I've been at the prison, my longest away time since I first started the group. And that 1.5 months has been spent in the most privileged way, in Greece on a working vacation. I am very conscious that I'm walking in with a deep tan. As Stephen and I make our way upstairs to the activities floor, he apologizes for forgetting to put the guys' names on a call sheet. This bit of internal paperwork alerts them to the meeting and gives them permission to attend. So only Lee, James, and Michael are waiting for me. This reminds me of the first halting days of the group, when 3 or 4 showed up, and I was lucky to have them. As I said before, I have 8 that come. I start by telling them about the books I've brought in. So I took a tour of the prison library, which has every 12-step self-help kind of book that's ever been written in the English language, and not much else. And my guys actually want to be writers. I mean, they want to write, and so they have nothing to read. So I started bringing in books, which I had to have pre-approved and everything. So I start by telling them the books that I brought in. We are actually setting up a lending library of narrative nonfiction. I'm starting it with copies of Into the Wild and The Soloist, which explore themes I think will resonate with them. I also bring in Jane Kramer's The Last Cowboy for Lee. His latest piece of writing, delivered to me via email when I was in Greece, is all about his off-the-grid early childhood when he, and apparently his father, fashioned themselves as Gary Cooper-style, strong, silent cowboy types. I ever so gently tease Lee when I hand him the book. I mean ever so gently. He looks up, looks me in the eye for an instant, looks down again. I think I see maybe the slightest hint of amusement. I also bring in a spare copy of Sherman Alexie's The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian because it's tough and funny, and sometimes they need funny. I start to tell them about today's 5-minute writing prompt. So I come in with a writing prompt, and then they also do other writing. And generally it's a single word, but sometimes not. So I start to tell them about the writing prompt, but Michael interrupts. "Aren't you going to tell us about your trip?" he asks. I hesitate. I try to figure out what to say. I decide to just say what I'm thinking. They give me honesty. They deserve it in return. I wasn't going to talk about it. I say it feels funny. It feels bad to talk about where I get to go when you're in here. I feel weird about it, like talking about chocolate layer cake to a dieter. Michael laughs. No, no, he says, we want to hear, we want to hear. Lee is silent, but James says, I'd love to hear about your travels. So James and Lee are two of the guys that went in at age 17. Tell us. So I tell them a very stripped down version about, well, I don't tell them what I'm going to say to you because this sounds I don't, about body surfing in the Libyan Sea and mountain hikes into ancient healing temples and the food, the glorious food. So I make it sound as unexciting as I can. They listen attentively, even Lee. I tell them that I read a 4-volume novel while I was gone, Elena Ferrante's Neapolitan series, and that a particular sentence stood out for me, and that's my prompt for today. To write, you have to want to have something survive you, is from the book. What do you want to survive you? I ask. What do you want your legacy to be? They put their heads down to write. They lose themselves in their thoughts. As usual, they would write long past the 5-minute mark. And of course, they're handwriting with pencils, with paper that I bring in. Lee reads first. I am prepared for his usual high-minded treatise on individuality and self-reliance, honor and virtue, the cowboy theme. And that's what he's written, but with a twist. He also writes a lot about Ayn Rand. I have to work to make the world safe for people like me, he says, reading in his quiet voice. People like him, he goes on to say, are people who believe in honor and virtue, who do not follow the path of least resistance, who give their word and never break it. I know this has something to do with his crime. He killed somebody, I know, but he felt that it was the right thing to do. He felt unapologetic about it. He could have copped some kind of plea or made life easier for himself, but didn't. He gives hints of this in his writing, but I don't know the whole story. He'll tell me the whole story sometime. James's piece is heartbreaking. He wants, quote, the me that was somebody's favorite, the kid who was loved by his family, to survive, at least in memory. Michael's response is simple and, like him, self-effacing. He isn't thinking about what he wants to survive him. He's thinking about right now, about how to live. That's it, you guys. Thanks.